pressure cuff squeezed my arm for the third time that morning, and I remember thinking it was the only thing in that hospital room actually holding me together. I had been admitted 2 days earlier, 29 weeks along, and my body had decided it was done cooperating. The doctors called it severe preeclampsia. My mother-in-law called it convenient timing. She said that while standing in the doorway of my hospital room, arms crossed, wearing the particular expression she reserved for moments when she wanted to remind me that I had never quite measured up to whatever version of a daughter-in-law she had imagined her son deserving. I had married my husband 3 years before, in a small ceremony in Columbus that his family attended with the enthusiasm of people attending a mandatory work event. I was 28, he was 32. I taught 3rd grade at an elementary school on the east side of town. He worked in commercial real estate. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday party, dated for 14 months, and gotten engaged on a Tuesday night in our kitchen, which was exactly the kind of unromantic proposal I had somehow always wanted. No restaurant, no audience, just him and me and the leftover pasta we had both forgotten to eat. His mother never forgave him for not proposing at her dining room table with her present so she could cry the right kind of tears. For 3 years I tried. I brought food to Sunday dinners that she ate 2 bites of before setting down her fork. I remembered her birthday, her sister's birthday, the anniversary of her husband's death. I asked about her garden and listened to the answers. I laughed at her jokes. I absorbed the small cruelties, the comments about my cooking, about my clothes, about the neighborhood we chose to live in, and I smiled and I swallowed and I kept trying. When I got pregnant, I thought things might change. They did not change. The morning sickness hit me at 7 weeks and did not stop. It was not the polite, manageable nausea that pregnancy books describe with gentle euphemisms. It was a war. My body became a place where nothing stayed down, where smells I had loved my whole life, coffee, garlic, my own perfume, turned into physical assaults. I lost 11 pounds in the first trimester. My doctor monitored me twice a week. My mother-in-law told me more than once that she had worked full-time through both her pregnancies without complaint. My husband didn't say anything when she said that. He never said anything when she said things like that. I noticed, but I filed it away in the drawer I had been filling for 3 years, the one I kept telling myself I'd deal with later. The preeclampsia diagnosis came at 28 weeks. My blood pressure had been creeping upward for a month. And then one Tuesday afternoon it spiked high enough that my OB sent me directly to the hospital from her office. No stops. Call your husband on the way. I was admitted within the hour. My husband arrived 40 minutes after that. His mother 20 minutes after him, uninvited but unsurprised. She had a way of inserting herself into crises she helped create. The first day my husband stayed. He sat in the chair beside my bed and held my hand and looked genuinely frightened, which made me feel, briefly, like we were on the same side of something. The second day, his mother arrived with a tote bag and what appeared to be a revised set of priorities. She pulled my husband into the hallway. I heard pieces. The property, the refinancing window. We can't wait another 2 weeks. When he came back into the room, he wouldn't meet my eyes. I already knew what was coming. I had known in the way you know things you have spent months pretending not to know, since the previous November. That was when I had found the secondary account. My husband had set it up at a credit union across town in his name only, and had been quietly moving money into it every month. Not enough at a time to trigger any alert, but enough that over 14 months it had accumulated into something significant. I found it by accident, looking for a receipt in his email, a tab he had left open on the shared laptop. I sat with it for a long time. Then I closed the laptop, and I made a decision. I did not confront him. I did not cry or throw things or demand explanations. I opened my own account the following week. I called a family law attorney in Dublin, a woman my colleague had used for her own divorce 2 years prior, and I scheduled a consultation. I started paying attention to every account we held jointly. I started documenting. I was not planning to leave him. Not then. I was planning to understand exactly what I was living inside. There is a difference. But by the time I was lying in that hospital bed with a blood pressure cuff cycling every 4 hours, and my mother-in-law standing in the doorway making comments about convenient timing, the distinction had collapsed. My husband came back in and sat down in the chair. He had his phone in his hands. "There's something we need to talk about," he said. I looked at the monitor beside me, my own heartbeat graphed in green. "The house," he said. He was looking at his phone, not at me. "My mother and I have been talking, and with everything going on with the medical bills coming, we think it might make sense to refinance. Pull some equity out. There's a good rate right now and the window is closing." The house was in my name. We had structured it that way deliberately. 3 years ago, on advice from my own father, who was a quiet man with a long memory and a deep skepticism of his son-in-law that he had expressed exactly once and then never mentioned again. It was one of those decisions I had been vaguely grateful for without fully understanding why. "I'd need you to sign some documents," my husband said. "My mother's lawyer drew them up. He can come by this afternoon." I looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," I said. He looked up from his phone. I think he expected more resistance. I had been giving him resistance, quietly and in small increments for months, and he had been choosing not to notice it, and so he had forgotten it was there. "Yeah?" he said. "Have him come by at 2, I said. What he did not know was that I had already called my attorney that morning. She had been fielding calls from me for 4 months by that point, and when I described my situation from a hospital bed at 7 in the morning, she did not seem surprised. She told me she could be there by noon. I told her to come at 1:30. I wanted 30 minutes with her before anyone else arrived. She came in through the main entrance, looking like someone who ate mornings like this for breakfast. A grey blazer, a leather portfolio, a handshake that communicated in 3 seconds that she had been in rooms like this one and had always walked out with what she came for. We went over everything quickly. She confirmed what I already knew. The house was mine. It had been mine since the deed was filed. My husband had no unilateral right to refinance it. Any document his mother's lawyer brought for me to sign would either be an attempt to change that or a way to use my signature to access equity in an account I would lose control of. "If he's been moving money into a separate account," she said, "that's dissipation of marital assets. That matters in Ohio." I already had 14 months of documentation, bank statements, screenshots, dates, amounts. I had put them in a folder in my attorney's office 3 months prior. She left at 1:55. At 2 o'clock exactly, the other attorney arrived, a man in his 50s with soft hands and a practiced smile, carrying a leather folder of his own. My mother-in-law was with him. My husband stood near the window. The attorney spread 3 documents on the rolling tray table beside my bed. He explained them with the calm, slightly condescending efficiency of someone accustomed to people signing things without reading them. I read them, all 3. It took me about 12 minutes. The first was a refinancing authorization. The second was a limited power of attorney that would have allowed my husband to execute financial decisions related to the property without my presence. The third was a document that would have restructured the equity split in ways that were subtle enough to miss on a quick read, but significant enough to matter. I set them aside. "I have something for you as well," I said. I opened the drawer in the bedside table and removed a manila envelope. My attorney had left it there before she walked out. I handed it to my husband. He looked at it for a moment without taking it. His mother made a sound that was not quite a word. He opened it. Inside was a divorce petition, already filed with the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas that morning, along with a summary of the dissipated assets, a copy of the secondary account records, and a formal notice that, as the sole owner of the property in question, I would be exercising my right not to refinance. My husband's face did a series of things in rapid succession that I will not pretend I did not find satisfying. "You can't," his mother started. "The filing is already in the system," I said. "You're welcome to call the clerk's office to confirm." The other attorney, to his credit, recovered quickly. He gathered his documents back into his folder with the practiced efficiency of someone who had also been in rooms like this one and understood when a situation had resolved itself. He said something quiet to my mother-in-law. She did not move for a moment. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something that might have been the earliest stage of recalibration. My husband sat down on the edge of the chair he had been sitting in for 2 days. He put his face in his hands. I reached over and pressed the call button for my nurse. My blood pressure needed to be checked again, and I had been on my feet, metaphorically speaking, for long enough. The divorce took 8 months. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, which means assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally, and a judge gets to decide what fairly means when one spouse has been systematically moving money out of reach. My attorney was very good at presenting that kind of timeline. The secondary account was treated as dissipation. My husband's attorney argued that he had been saving for a family emergency. The judge was not persuaded. I kept the house. My daughter was born 6 weeks after I was admitted to the hospital. Early but healthy, which the NICU nurses told me every single day with a conviction that made me believe them even on the days I was too tired to feel it. She had my husband's dark hair and my grandmother's mouth, and she held my finger with a grip that seemed, for a newborn, unnecessarily determined. I went back to teaching the following fall. Third graders do not care about your divorce or your preeclampsia or the particular quiet that settles into a house when it belongs entirely to you and a 7-pound person who is learning, slowly, to sleep through the night. They care about whether you have markers in enough colours and whether you will read to them after lunch. I kept reading to them after lunch. I kept the house. I kept going. My mother-in-law has not spoken to me since the afternoon in the hospital room. I have thought about what I might say to her, if she ever did, not to wound, but to explain. That I had not wanted it to end the way it ended. That I had tried, genuinely, for 3 years. That there is a version of her son I had loved enough to build a life with, and I still grieve that version sometimes. Late at night, when the house is quiet and the monitor in my daughter's room shows the steady rhythm of someone who has never once doubted she was wanted. But she hasn't called, and I've stopped keeping space open for explanations I may never get to give. The blood pressure cuff is gone now. The hospital bracelet is in a box in my closet, next to the card my nurse wrote me the day I was discharged. She had written, "You were tougher than you looked." I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it was the first time in a long time someone had said something true about me without needing anything in return. I think about that sometimes, when my daughter is asleep and the house is mine, and the night is quiet enough to hear the specific silence of a life you chose. It doesn't feel like winning, it feels better than that. It feels like solid ground. There's a version of that hospital room I still visit sometimes. Not to relive it, just to understand it better than I did while I was in it. I had a blood pressure cuff cycling on my arm every 4 hours, a baby pressing against my ribs, and a husband sitting 3 feet away who'd already decided what kind of man he was going to be. He had made that decision quietly, over 14 months, in small increments he thought no one would notice. That's the thing about people who deceive gradually. They convince themselves that because no single step was large, none of it counts. It counts. What I've come to believe, not from any scripture or tradition, but from the plain evidence of my own life, is that actions build on themselves. Not in a mystical way, in a mechanical one. My husband moved money in secret, and that required lying, and the lying required distance, and the distance required more lies to explain the distance, until the person sitting beside my hospital bed was someone I recognized only by face. He had constructed that outcome one small decision at a time, and so had I. Only mine were different decisions, paying attention, documenting, calling an attorney before I needed one, not because I wanted the marriage to end, but because I had started to understand that integrity isn't only about what you do when people are watching, it's what you do with the truth when you're alone with it. That's the part that saved me, not cleverness, not luck. The simple choice, made in private, to deal honestly with what I actually knew rather than what I wished were true. I think about my daughter and the things I want her to understand about the world. I want her to know that her character, the actual content of it, what she does when no one is looking and nothing is at stake, is the only thing she will never be able to outsource or replace. I want her to know that understanding her own situation clearly, without flattering herself and without catastrophizing, is a form of intelligence that no test measures but that matters more than any score. And I want her to know that endurance is not the same as passivity. I endured 3 years of small cruelties, but I did not drift through them. I stayed awake. I kept moving, quietly, towards solid ground. I was not a perfect person in that marriage. There were things I should have said sooner, conversations I avoided because I was afraid of what they would confirm. That's true. But I did not deceive anyone. I did not take what wasn't mine. When the moment came, I acted from a place of preparation, not panic, and that difference determined everything. My daughter is almost 2 now. She has opinions about which socks she wears and strong feelings about whether bananas are acceptable before noon. She has no idea that she was born into the middle of the worst and the clearest year of my life. Someday I'll tell her, not to burden her, but because I think the story is worth knowing, that her mother was frightened and tired and still made the right calls. That doing the right thing and doing the hard thing were, in that season, exactly the same thing. That's what solid ground feels like. You don't arrive there by accident.